Stop the service. This land belongs to Heritage Capital Group now. You have no legal right to continue. The man in the black suit stood in the middle of the road like he owned the whole world. Behind him, 40 motorcycles idled, 40 Hells Angels riders, silent, watching. The widow was sobbing on her knees in the gravel. The pallbearers had frozen mid-step, a casket balanced between them. And Richard Hale with his lawyers, his documents, his arrogance, had not yet looked carefully at the small blonde woman in the black coat standing 10 feet away from him. He was about to make the worst mistake of his life. If this story already has your heart pounding, please subscribe to the channel right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me until the very end, because what happens next will leave you absolutely speechless. The morning of October the 14th began the way every difficult morning begins in Red Valley, Tennessee, quietly with fog sitting low over the hills and the smell of cold earth coming through every crack in every old building on Main Street. Savannah Cole had been awake since 4:30, not because she was nervous, not because she was afraid. She had been awake since 4:30 because that was simply who she was. That was the woman her father had raised. The kind of woman who pressed her clothes the night before, who made her coffee before sunrise, who believed that the way you prepared for a day revealed everything about your character. She stood in front of the mirror in her small office at the back of Cole & Sons funeral home, straightening the collar of her black coat, smoothing the lapels with both hands. Her hair was the color of winter wheat, pale blonde, going silver at the temples, and she wore it pinned back the way she always did. No jewelry except the small gold cross her mother had given her 40 years ago. No perfume. Families came here grieving. They didn't need to be reminded that the rest of the world was still alive and going about its ordinary business. She looked at herself for a moment, just a moment. Then she turned away. She had work to do. Daniel Dawson's casket had arrived from the prep room the evening before. She had overseen every detail herself, arrangement of the flowers, the placement of the flags, the small framed photographs lined up on the table near the entrance, because Daniel had been proud of his life and his people, and pride deserved to be displayed. His widow, a woman named Frances Dawson, had sat with Savannah for 2 hours 2 days earlier, going through every photograph with shaking hands in a voice that kept breaking, and Savannah had listened to every single word because listening was the most sacred thing she knew how to do. Frances had said, near the end of that conversation, "He always said you were the only one he trusted with this. He said it years ago before he was even sick. He said, 'Frances, when it's time you take me to Savannah Cole, she'll do right by me.'" Savannah had squeezed the woman's hand and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Daniel Dawson had trusted her with the most important goodbye of his life, and she was going to honor that trust down to the last detail. She hadn't known, standing in her quiet office at 4:30 in the morning, that someone was already planning to make sure that didn't happen. By 7 o'clock, her assistant, Marcus, was in. Marcus Tate was 29 years old, had worked at Cole & Sons for 4 years, and operated with the quiet competence of someone twice his age. He'd come from a funeral home over in Knoxville, but he'd told Savannah once that he'd moved because he wanted to work somewhere that still felt like it stood for something. She'd hired him the same afternoon. "Flowers are set," he said, coming through the back door with a clipboard. Frances called. "The family will arrive at 9:30. Riders are expected by 9. Victor Kane confirmed 38 bikes minimum." Savannah nodded. "And the permits?" "Filed 6 weeks ago. Everything's clean, Savannah. The road closure request was approved by the county 2 weeks back. We're legal down to the inch." She looked at him. "Good, because someone will try to make this complicated." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You think Heritage Capital has been circling this property for 8 months, Marcus? They've delayed 2 of our services with surprise inspections. They sent a letter 2 weeks ago suggesting our operating license was under review." She paused. "They know about this funeral. They know the community that's coming. They are going to try something." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" Savannah picked up her coffee mug. "I want to do what I always do. I want to bury Daniel Dawson with the dignity he deserved, and I want to be ready for whatever comes next." She said it the way she said most things, calmly, without drama, without theater. But Marcus, who had worked beside her long enough to read the space between her words, felt the iron underneath. He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." The riders began arriving at 8:40. You could hear them before you saw them, the low rolling rumble that started as a distant vibration and grew into something you felt in your chest before you heard it with your ears. Red Valley wasn't a big town. It had one main road, a gas station, a diner that had been open since 1974, and a hardware store run by a man named Gerald, who had strong opinions about everything. The town was not accustomed to the kind of arrival that was happening now. One by one, then two by two, then in clusters of 5 and 6 and 8, the motorcycles pulled in along the road that ran in front of Cole and Son's funeral home. The riders cut their engines, they dismounted. They moved with the particular quiet that comes over people when they are in the presence of grief. Heads slightly bowed, hands clasped or stuffed into jacket pockets, faces that were tough and weathered and entirely completely human. Some of them Savannah knew by name. She'd buried their brothers, their fathers. She'd held their wives' hands in this same building and helped them choose flowers and pick music and figure out how to say goodbye to someone they were not ready to lose. She'd learned a long time ago that the patches on their jackets, the reputation that preceded them, the assumptions that ordinary people made when they heard the words Hell's Angels, none of that told you a single true thing about who these men actually were in the moments that mattered most. She stood on the front steps as they arrived, and she greeted them the way she always did. She looked them in the eye. She said their names when she knew them. She shook hands. She accepted the quiet nods that, in this community, meant more than words. Victor Kane arrived last. I was a big man, Victor, broad-shouldered with a gray beard that had been well kept for as long as Savannah had known him, and eyes that were dark and watchful and not unkind. He was 64 years old. He had been the regional leader for nearly 2 decades. He was the kind of man who walked into rooms and rooms changed. He climbed off his bike, straightened up to his full height, and looked at Savannah. Savannah, he said. Victor, she said back. He walked to the steps and they shook hands. His grip was firm and warm. Daniel would have liked this, he said quietly, looking at the line of motorcycles stretching down the road. He would have complained there weren't more, she said. Victor made a sound that was almost a laugh, almost. He was never satisfied. Then his expression went serious. You doing all right? I heard the company's been giving you trouble. Nothing I can't handle, she said. He looked at her for a moment, the way people look at you when they're deciding whether to believe you or push harder. Then he nodded. All right, but you know we're here. I know, she said. I've always known. Frances Dawson arrived at 9:20 with her 2 adult sons, her daughter, 3 grandchildren, and her sister, who had flown in from Atlanta. Savannah met them at the door herself. She walked Frances inside with one hand gently at her elbow, not holding her up, just present, just there. And she watched the widow move through the room. Her husband's people had filled, watched her stop at the casket, watched her press both hands flat against the lid and bow her head, and the room went absolutely silent. Every single rider in that space dropped his eyes, not out of obligation, out of respect, because this was what it meant to be in the presence of love and loss at the same time, and even the roughest people alive understood what that cost. Savannah stood back. This was not her moment. This was Frances's moment. This was Daniel's moment. Her job was to have made it possible and then to disappear into the edges of it. The service began at 10 o'clock as scheduled. Pastor Gene Whitfield, who was 72 and had the voice of a man who had been speaking hard truths gently for half a century, led the congregation in prayer. 3 of Daniel's writing brothers stood up and told stories about him, funny stories, honest stories, the kind of stories that made people laugh and cry inside the same minute. Frances spoke last, and she was shaking the whole time, but she didn't stop, once didn't ask for help, because Daniel had always said she was the strongest person he knew, and she was determined to prove him right one final time. Savannah stood at the back of the room and listened to every word. She was the first one to notice the black SUV when it pulled up outside. She saw it through the window, a vehicle that had no place in the context of what was happening on this street today. Black, expensive, with tinted windows and no plates visible from where she stood. It parked across the road. Nobody got out immediately. It just sat there. Marcus appeared at her elbow. You see it? I see it, she said. Want me to go check? Not yet. Let the service finish. But the service didn't finish undisturbed. The back door of the SUV opened at 10:47, just as Pastor Whitfield was moving toward the final blessing. A man in a charcoal gray suit stepped out onto the road. He was in his mid-40s, clean-shaven, the kind of person who had been told his entire life that his confidence was an asset and had never been forced to reconsider that belief. He reached back into the SUV and pulled out a manila envelope thick with documents. Then he walked toward the funeral home entrance. Two more men got out behind him. Savannah was already moving. She reached the front door before he did, stepped outside into the cold October air, and pulled the door closed behind her. Behind the door inside, Pastor Whitfield's voice continued. She needed it to continue. She needed Francis Dawson to have these last minutes without interruption. The man in the suit stopped when he saw her. He looked her up and down, a quick dismissive assessment, the kind of look that decides everything about a person in under 2 seconds and is almost always wrong. "Richard Hale," he said, "Heritage Capital Group. I need to speak with the owner of this property." "You're speaking with her," Savannah said. A flicker of something moved across his face. Adjustment. "Ms. Cole, we've been sending letters for several months regarding the legal status of this property. I've received your letters. I've had counsel review every one of them. Then your counsel should have advised you that the outstanding line on this property, combined with the zoning dispute filed in August, creates a legal situation where continued commercial operation." "Mr. Hale," Savannah said, and her voice was very quiet, very level. "There is a family inside this building right now saying goodbye to their husband and their father and their grandfather. I'm going to ask you to step back to your vehicle and wait." Richard Hale looked at the door behind her. He looked at the motorcycles. He looked back at her. Something calculated moved behind his eyes. "The service needs to end," he said. "We have paperwork that supersedes your permit for use of this property today, including the road closure. You are in violation." "I am in nothing," Savannah said, and for just a fraction of a second, something shifted under the surface of her composure. Not anger, colder than anger. "I am conducting a licensed funeral service on property I own with permits filed and approved by the county. You are a man standing on a public road holding a piece of paper. I suggest you think very carefully about your next words." One of the riders nearest the door had turned to watch, then another. Richard Hale heard the shift in the ambient noise behind him, the subtle attention of 38 people who had been quietly waiting and were now quietly watching, and for 1 second, just one, he hesitated. Then he straightened and said louder now, projecting, "I need this service stopped. Stop the service. This land belongs to Heritage Capital Group now. You have no legal right to continue." And that was the moment. That was the sentence that sent everything into motion. The door opened behind Savannah. Marcus was there. "Savannah. Hold the door, Marcus. Nobody comes out." She didn't turn around. Her eyes were on Richard Hale. "Nobody panics. Hold the door." She heard him pull it shut. She heard the motorcycles. 38 engines, all of them cold and silent, all of them representing 38 human beings who were now standing up from where they'd been leaning on their bikes. Richard Hale looked past her at the wall of people forming behind him on the road, and she watched him recalibrate, watched him decide that the documents in his hands were a shield. That paper could stop this. "Ms. Cole," he said, and his voice had changed. The confidence was still there, but it had acquired an edge of something that wanted to look like authority and was coming close to looking like nervousness instead. "I'm going to need you to sign this agreement today, right now. If you refuse, I have legal authority to..." "To what?" she said. He blinked. "To what, Mr. Hale," she said again, still quiet, still level. "Be specific. What exactly do you believe you have the legal authority to do on a public road in front of a licensed funeral establishment during an active permitted service?" He opened his mouth, and Victor Kane's voice came from behind her, low and even, and carrying the kind of weight that does not need volume. "I'd like to hear the answer to that question too." Savannah didn't move, but she felt something release in her chest, not relief, not yet, but the particular feeling of knowing you are not in this moment alone. Richard Hale looked at Victor Kane for the first time. He took in the man's height, his bearing, the jacket he wore, the fact that behind him the entire road was lined with people who shared that jacket. And Richard Hale, corporate attorney, Heritage Capital Regional Representative, a man who had spent 15 years legally pressuring ordinary people out of their properties with paperwork and technicalities in the casual confidence of someone who had never once been seriously challenged. Richard Hale did something he clearly was not accustomed to doing. He went very still. Savannah turned slightly to look at Victor. He was standing at the bottom of the front steps, hands in his pockets, the most relaxed-looking person on the entire street. She looked back at Richard. Mr. Hale, the service is going to conclude. Frances Dawson is going to say goodbye to her husband. The procession is going to proceed to the cemetery on the route we have permitted. And then only then you are going to have the opportunity to present whatever paperwork you feel is relevant, and I am going to have my attorney present when you do. That is what's going to happen today. She tilted her head just slightly. Unless you'd like to explain to this county, this community, and every news organization within driving distance, why you chose to interrupt a widow's funeral with a corporate real estate dispute. The silence stretched. One of Richard's two companions leaned toward him and said something low. Richard looked down at the envelope in his hands. Then he looked up at Savannah Cole, at this 60-year-old woman in a plain black coat with her hair pinned back and no jewelry, except a small gold cross, and she watched him try to find the angle, the leverage, the move that would reestablish the hierarchy he'd walked in expecting. He couldn't find it. This conversation isn't over, he said finally. No, she agreed. It isn't. He stepped back, looked at his companions, made a decision with his face that he was trying to make look like strategy rather than retreat. He walked back to the SUV. His companions followed. The SUV didn't leave. It parked further up the road. Savannah stood on the steps for a moment after they'd gone. She breathed, one slow breath in, one out. Then she turned and opened the door behind her. Inside, Pastor Whitfield was closing the service. His voice was the same as it had always been. The room was intact. Frances Dawson was surrounded by her children. Savannah slipped back to her place at the edge of the room. Marcus materialized at her side. What happened? We have maybe 2 hours before he comes back, she said. Marcus looked at her. And I have some calls to make, so. The procession left at 11:15. Watching it from the side of the road, you would have felt it before you saw it, the low, immense rumble of engines, the way the air shifted when 38 motorcycles began to move in formation. The hearse moved at the center of it, flanked and followed and preceded by riders who moved in the careful, deliberate way of people doing something that mattered. Frances and her children followed in a black car behind the hearse. The people of Red Valley, who happened to be on the street that morning, stopped and watched. Some of them took off their hats. Some of them just stood very still. An old man outside the hardware store pressed his hand flat against his chest. Savannah rode in a car at the back of the procession. She had her phone in her hand. She was making calls. The first call was to her attorney, a woman named Diane Pierce, who had been practicing law in Red Valley for 26 years and had a reputation for being aggressively thorough. Savannah had been in contact with Diane already for months since the first Heritage Capital letter arrived, and Diane had been building a file. They showed up in person today, Savannah said, and she described what had happened in 6 efficient sentences. Diane's response was immediate. They are walking themselves into the worst possible optics. Do you have a witness count? Approximately 40 people plus Marcus plus the Dawson family. Keep everyone together after the burial. Don't let the riders leave. I'll have a colleague there within the hour. There's more, Savannah said. I have something I need to show you. Something I've been keeping in a lockbox in my office for about 2 years. I should have brought it to you sooner. A pause. What is it? Evidence, Savannah said. The kind of evidence that explains why Heritage Capital has been targeting businesses in this county for the past 5 years, and why nobody has stopped them yet. She paused. Because nobody knew who to tell. Another pause, longer this time. I'll be there in 45 minutes, Diane said. Savannah ended the call. She looked out the window at the procession moving through the streets of Red Valley, her town, her home, the place her father had built something from nothing, because he believed ordinary people deserved dignity, regardless of who the world said they were. She thought about her father, about the night he opened the door for Michael Iron Dawson's family, when every other funeral home in the county had turned them away. She thought about being 25 years old and watching grown tough men cry over a casket and understanding for the first time that strength and grief could exist in the same body, that roughness on the outside meant exactly nothing about what was underneath. She thought about the small metal box in the locked cabinet in her office, the one she'd been adding to for 2 years, the letters, the records, the names, the dates. She thought about Richard Hale and his manila envelope and his 2 men and his black SUV parked up the road waiting for her to return. She thought, you have no idea what you've walked into. She said none of it out loud. She just watched the procession move forward, and she waited. The burial was at noon. Daniel Dawson went into the ground the way he would have wanted, with noise and warmth, and people who had loved him standing in the cold without complaint, because being there for each other was simply what you did. Victor Kane stood at the head of the grave for a moment after the final words were spoken, and he didn't say anything. He just stood there with his hat in his hands, and that said everything. Frances stood straight through the whole thing. Her sons flanked her. When the first handful of earth went down, she closed her eyes, and her older son put his arm around her, and she leaned into him just slightly, just for one moment, and then she straightened back up. Savannah stood at a respectful distance and watched over all of it. This was what she did. This was what her father had done. Not managing grief from behind a desk, not performing sympathy like a transaction, but standing in it with people, being present in the hard moments that most of the world looked away from. When it was over, she approached Frances and took both the widow's hands in her own. "He had a beautiful farewell," Savannah said. Frances looked at her for a long moment. "Someone tried to stop it," she said. "It wasn't a..." Savannah didn't lie. "Someone tried. And you didn't let them." "No," Frances squeezed her hands. "He was right about you," she said. "He always said you were the kind of person that holds the world steady when everything else is falling. He said that to me, more than once." Savannah felt something move in her chest that she kept carefully off her face. This was not the moment for her feelings. This was Frances's moment. "You take care of yourself and your family," Savannah said. "That's the only thing that matters today." She walked back toward the cars. Victor fell into step beside her. "Your company's still parked up at the road," he said. "I know. You want company when you go back." Savannah looked at him. "They're not going to let this go today, Victor. When I get back to the home, it's going to get harder before it gets easier." "I know. You don't have to be part of it." Victor Kane looked at her the way someone looks at a person when they've said something that reveals a misunderstanding so fundamental it almost doesn't deserve a response. "Savannah," he said, "we've been part of this since the minute they parked that vehicle on your road." She held his gaze. "All right. All right," he said back. They walked toward the cars. Behind them, the riders were moving, remounting engines, beginning to turn over again. Not leaving, falling back into formation. And Savannah Cole, who had been awake since 4:30 in the morning, who had put a man in the ground with the dignity he deserved, who had stood on her own front steps and looked into the face of a corporate attorney and not blinked, Savannah Cole got in her car and went back to finish it. Because she had never in her life left something unfinished, and she was not about to start now. The black SUV was waiting in her parking lot when she got back. Richard Hale was leaning against the hood with his arms crossed. His two companions stood on either side of him. He had changed his posture. He was going for relaxed, going for casual, the kind of body language that was supposed to say, "I've been waiting and I'm not bothered, and this is already decided." But Savannah could see the set of his jaw. He was bothered. She parked. She got out. She walked toward him across the lot with her keys in her hand, and she did not hurry. "Miss Cole," he said, "I appreciate your patience. I know today was difficult, but we do need to resolve this." "Come inside," she said, and walked past him to the front door. He hesitated. She could feel it, the micropause of a man who wanted to dictate the terms of the encounter and was finding that she wasn't giving him the opportunity. Then he followed. His companions followed him. She unlocked the door, held it open, and stepped in after them. Marcus was inside, standing near the desk, and his expression told her that the hour while she'd been at the cemetery had not been quiet. "Two more people showed up," he said low. "Set from the county assessor's office. Said he had questions about the property valuation." "That's Heritage Capital's doing," she said just as low. "I know. I asked him to wait in the hall." "Good." She looked at Richard Hale, who was standing in the center of her front room, her family's room, the room her father had furnished, the room that had held the grief of 3 generations of Red Valley families, with his manila envelope, and his 2 men and his certainty. "Sit down, Mr. Hale." He remained standing. "I'd prefer to keep this brief. You know what we're asking for. The property assessment shows..." "Sit down," she said again. Same tone, equally quiet. He sat. She went to her office. She unlocked the cabinet. She picked up the metal box. It was heavy the way a thing is heavy when it has been accumulated over years, when it represents not a single moment but a pattern, and she carried it back into the front room. She set it on the table between them. Richard looked at it. What is that? That, said Savannah Cole, is the reason you should have chosen a different target. She lifted the lid. And outside on the road in front of Cole and Son's funeral home, the sound started again. First one motorcycle, then another, then more. The windows of the room began to vibrate very slightly, just a tremor in the glass. And Richard Hale looked up from the box, and Savannah watched his expression change. He stood up and went to the window. The road outside was filling. Not just Victor and the 38 from this morning. More. Word had gone out, she didn't know exactly when, didn't know which phone call or which message, but someone had made it, and now more riders were arriving, pulling in from both ends of the road, engines loud, and then going quiet as they cut off the sudden absence of sound, somehow louder than the sound itself. What is this? Richard said. This, said Savannah, is what it looks like when 30 years of doing right by people comes back to you. She opened the first folder in the box, laid the papers on the table one at a time. Richard turned from the window. He looked at the papers. He looked at her. And for the first time since he had stepped out of that black SUV that morning, for the first time since he had stood on her road and told her to stop the service, Savannah Cole watched Richard Hale understand that he had made a terrible miscalculation. Not about the law, about her. She looked at him steadily. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply waited with the patience of a woman who had been waiting for this moment for 2 years, while he began slowly and with visible effort to comprehend the size of what was sitting in that box on the table in front of him. Then she said quietly, "Let's start at the beginning, Mr. Hale, because I have documented every single thing your company has done in this county, and I have witnesses who have been waiting a very long time for someone to ask them the right questions." She folded her hands. "Today," she said, "I am finally asking." Richard Hale stared at the papers on the table, the way a man stares at something he was not prepared to see, with his jaw tight and his eyes moving fast, the way eyes move when a brain is working hard to find an exit that isn't there. Savannah let him look. She didn't rush him. She didn't explain. She had spent 2 years building what was in that box, and she had learned from her father that the most powerful thing you could do in a room was simply wait. Let the truth sit there. Let it breathe. Let the other person feel the full weight of it before you said a single word. Marcus stood near the door. He hadn't moved since she'd come back in. He had the particular stillness of someone who understood that what was happening in this room was not ordinary. One of Richard's companions, the younger one, sandy-haired, who'd been trying to look bored since the moment they'd walked in, leaned forward to look at the papers. Richard put his hand out without looking at him, a flat, instinctive gesture. "Stop." The young man leaned back. Richard picked up one of the documents. He read it for a moment. Then he set it down and picked up another. His breathing had changed, not dramatically, not in a way that a stranger would notice, but Savannah noticed. She noticed everything. She had spent 30 years in rooms with people who were trying very hard to hold themselves together, and she knew every signal. "Where did you get these?" he said finally. "I collected them," she said. "From where?" "From people your company didn't think would talk to each other." She pulled her chair out and sat down across from him. "Unhurried, deliberate. That was your first mistake, Mr. Hale. You assumed that because the people you were targeting were isolated. Small business owners, working families, people without corporate lawyers on speed dial, you assumed they weren't communicating. You assumed they were each fighting alone." He looked up from the papers. "They weren't alone," she said. "They've been talking to me for 2 years. The room was very quiet. Outside, the engines were all silent now. The riders had arrived and gone still, and that collective silence was somehow more present than noise would have been. It pressed against the windows. It filled the space under the door. It was the sound of a very large number of people being very deliberately patient. Richard set the document down. He straightened in his chair and put on the face he used when he needed to look like he was conceding nothing. "Ms. Cole, even if some of these documents were legitimate, and I'm not conceding that they are a collection of letters and records from disgruntled small business owners, doesn't constitute a legal case against." "Pull out the folder marked November 2023, Savannah said. He blinked. "I'm sorry. The folder with the red tab, second from the bottom. Pull it out and look at what's inside." He hesitated just long enough to make clear he didn't want to follow her instruction. Then he reached into the box and found the folder and opened it. He was quiet for a long time. The young companion tried again to look. This time Richard didn't stop him. He was too busy reading. Savannah watched him. She watched the moment when he found the specific page she knew he would find, watched his eyes stop moving, watched the stillness that came over his face that was different from the controlled stillness he'd been performing since he walked in. This was the stillness of someone who had just discovered that the ground under their feet was not as solid as they'd believed. "This is an internal communication," he said. His voice was carefully flat. "Yes," she said. "How did you—" He stopped himself, started again. "This document is confidential. I imagine it was meant to be," she said. He looked at her across the table, and for the first time she saw something shift in his expression that was not strategy. It was something rawer than that. The particular look of a person who has just realized they have badly, seriously miscalculated. "Who gave this to you?" Savannah folded her hands on the table. "Someone who worked for Heritage Capital for 11 years and watched the company change from something that built things into something that dismantled them. Someone who kept records because she had a conscience and didn't know what else to do with it." She paused. "Someone who isn't alone either." Richard Hale set the folder down. He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. Then he looked up at her. "What do you want?" And there it was, the question, the one that always came eventually in every room, in every negotiation, the moment when the power shifted and the person who'd walked in, holding all of it, suddenly needed to know the terms of a deal they hadn't expected to be making. Savannah had thought about this moment. She had thought about it many times over the past 2 years. She had imagined anger, triumph, satisfaction. She had imagined herself feeling many things. What she actually felt was tired and clear. "I want you to leave this property," she said. "I want Heritage Capital to withdraw every legal claim, every lien dispute, and every zoning challenge filed against my funeral home. And I want the same done for every other small business in this county that your company has been systematically dismantling for the past 5 years. Richard stared at her. "That's what I want," she said, "today." He made a sound that was trying to be a laugh and didn't quite make it. "Ms. Cole, I'm not authorized to— Then get someone on the phone who is," she said. He stared at her. "Mr. Hale, I have an attorney arriving in approximately 20 minutes. I have documentation of your company's pattern of purchasing distressed debt and using technical violations to force small business owners into sales at below market value. I have internal communications that appear to show this was not incidental but deliberate strategy. I have a federal contact at the Small Business Administration that my attorney has already been in touch with." She leaned forward slightly. "And I have 40-something witnesses outside this building who watched your company try to halt a funeral service this morning, which is the kind of story that tends to travel fast and land hard." She held his gaze. "You walked in here today expecting to close a deal on a piece of property. I'm offering you the opportunity to walk out of here without a federal investigation attached to your name. Those two outcomes are not equivalent. I suggest you choose carefully." The silence in the room was different now. It had weight and direction. The older companion, the one who hadn't tried to look at the documents, who'd been quiet the whole time with the stillness of someone who was actually listening, cleared his throat. "Richard," he said quietly. Richard didn't look at him. "Richard," the man said again. Something passed between them. An acknowledgement, a calculation being revised in real time. Richard Hale reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone. He stepped outside to make the call. His two companions went with him. Marcus moved to the window and watched them without being obvious about it. Savannah stayed at the table. She picked up her coffee mug and discovered it was empty and set it back down. She was very still. "You doing okay?" Marcus said without turning from the window. "Ask me in an hour," she said. "Diane just pulled up." "Good." He turned around. He looked at her with the expression he used when he was going to say something he thought she might push back on. "Savannah, that internal document, the one from November 2023, how long have you been sitting on that?" She was quiet for a moment. "Since February." "February?" He said it like he was doing math. 8 months. You've been holding that for 8 months and you never— "I was waiting for the right moment," she said. "The right moment," he repeated. He shook his head, not in disapproval, in something closer to wonder. "You knew this day was coming." "I knew something was coming," she said. "I didn't know it would be today. I didn't know it would be Daniel's funeral." She paused. "I wish it hadn't been. He deserved a day that was just about him." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Maybe it was, he said. Maybe it was just about him, in a way. Daniel spent 40 years in that community. He was part of why those people are outside right now. You said it yourself, you don't have those riders here today just because of you. You have them here because of every single person you showed up for. Daniel was part of that. She looked at him. He was 29 years old, and sometimes without warning, he said things that cut straight to the center of something true. Don't get wise on me, she said. Too late, he said. The front door opened. Diane Pierce walked in, 53, silver-haired, wearing a coat that said she'd left her office in a hurry and hadn't stopped to do anything about it. She carried a large leather bag that Savannah knew held at minimum 6 folders, a legal pad, her laptop, and a voice recorder she brought to every meeting involving Heritage Capital, whether they knew about it or not. Diane looked at the metal box on the table. She looked at Savannah. You used the box. I used the box. Diane sat down, put her bag on the floor, and pulled out the legal pad. Tell me everything. From this morning, every word he said. Savannah told her. Clean, organized, chronological. She'd always been able to do that, hold events in sequence, even when they were chaotic, report them back accurately. Another thing her father had taught her, another tool of the trade that turned out to have uses far beyond any trade. Diane wrote while she listened and asked 3 sharp questions and didn't interrupt otherwise. When Savannah finished, Diane looked at the box. He saw the November folder. Yes. How did he react? He asked me how I got it. Then he asked what I wanted. Then he went outside to make a phone call. Diane tapped the legal pad with her pen. That phone call is to someone with more authority than he has. He's not going to be able to authorize what you're asking. But someone above him might. She looked at Savannah directly. You understand this isn't going to resolve today, right? Today you buy yourself breathing room. Today you put them on notice. The actual resolution takes time. I know, Savannah said, but today matters. I know that too. Outside, Victor Kane was standing near the front steps when Richard Hale came back around from the side of the building. He'd been on his phone for 11 minutes. Marcus had been timing quietly from the window. Now he walked back toward the front door with a different posture. Not broken, but reconfigured. The way a person walks when they've received instructions they weren't expecting. Victor didn't move from the steps. Richard stopped. He looked at the big man blocking his path, not threatening, not aggressive, just present in the particular way that Victor Kane was always present, which was completely and without apology. My condolences for your brother, Richard said. The words were the right words, but the delivery was wrong, too transactional. Victor looked at him for a long moment. Daniel wasn't my blood, he said. He was better than blood. He was chosen. He paused. You have a family, Mr. Hale? Richard blinked at the shift. I don't see what that has to... Just a question, Victor said, a pause. Yes, I have a family. Then you know what it costs when somebody makes the worst day of their life harder. Victor's voice was even, unhurried. You understand what that costs. He stepped aside. Go finish your business with Savannah Cole, and think about what I just said while you do it. Richard went inside. Marcus met Savannah's eyes across the room when the door opened. She gave him the smallest nod. She was ready. Richard Hale sat back down. He put his phone on the table. He didn't look comfortable. He had the look of a man who had received specific instructions and was now trying to figure out how to execute them while preserving some portion of whatever dignity he'd walked in with. I spoke with our legal division, he said. I assumed you did, Savannah said. They've asked me to communicate that Heritage Capital is prepared to pause its proceedings regarding this property, pending a review of the documentation you've presented today. Diane's pen moved across the legal pad. A pause isn't a withdrawal, Savannah said. No, it isn't. A withdrawal would require your company to acknowledge that the claims were without merit, Diane said. She hadn't looked up from the legal pad, which your legal division is not yet prepared to do on the record. I understand. Now she looked up. So here is what we're going to do. You are going to provide us with written confirmation of the pause by close of business today. That confirmation is going to include specific language indicating that Heritage Capital will take no further action, legal, regulatory, or otherwise against this property or its operations while the review is underway. The review will have a defined timeline, 60 days. Richard looked at her. 90. 60, Diane said. Because in 90 days, my client could file what she's holding, and we both know what happens to Heritage Capital's regional operations when she does. So, 60 days, written confirmation by 5 o'clock today. And while we're talking, I want the name of every other small business in this county that Heritage Capital has an active claim against. The room was extremely quiet. That's not something I'm authorized to. Then get authorized, Diane said, because the alternative is that we walk out of this conversation and I make 3 phone calls this afternoon, and one of those calls is to the State Attorney General's office, and one of them is to a journalist I've known for 15 years who has been looking for a Heritage Capital story for about as long as my client has been collecting what's in that box. She set down her pen. I'm not bluffing, Mr. Hale. I am never bluffing. Ask anyone in this county who's been across a table from me. Another silence, longer this time. Richard looked at the box. He looked at Diane. He looked at Savannah. Savannah said nothing. She had said what she needed to say. This was Diane's room now. Richard picked up his phone again. He made 2 more calls. The first one lasted 4 minutes. He didn't say much during it. Mostly he listened, said understood twice, said yes 3 times, and ended it. The second call lasted 8 minutes and involved considerably more back and forth. And at one point he said, I understand the risk, that's why I'm telling you, in the low, careful voice of a person communicating an emergency to someone who does not yet fully appreciate that it is one. While he called, Marcos brought Diane a cup of coffee. She accepted it without taking her eyes off her legal pad. She was writing something, not notes, Savannah realized. She was drafting language, getting ready. Savannah got up quietly and walked to her office. She stood in the doorway and looked at the room, her father's desk still after all these years. The same chair, the photographs on the wall, the window that looked out toward the back parking lot where the first Dawson had been carried in 35 years ago on a night that had changed the shape of her life. She thought about Michael Iron Dawson. She had been 25. She remembered the night her father came to find her. She'd been doing paperwork at the front desk, the routine work of a business that never really closed, and he'd come in with his coat still on his face, carrying the particular expression she'd learned to read as something harder than the ordinary hard. He'd said, there's a family coming in tonight. Motorcycle accident. The young man's name is Michael Dawson. I need you to know before they arrive that some people in this town are going to have opinions about us taking this case. She'd been 25. She'd said, what kind of opinions? He'd looked at her steadily. The wrong kind. He'd hung up his coat. And I want you to know that your grandfather built this business on one principle, and I built it on the same principle, and you are going to build it on the same principle after me. And that principle is that grief does not have a dress code. He'd straightened his collar. So we are going to receive this family the same way we receive every family. And if anyone in this town has a problem with that, they can come talk to me personally. She'd nodded. She'd gone back to her paperwork, but she'd never forgotten his face when he said it. The absolute certainty, the absence of doubt, the way a person looks when they know down to the bone that they are doing the right thing. She'd spent 35 years trying to look that way herself. She heard Marcus say her name. She came back. Richard Hale had finished his calls. He was sitting with his phone on the table in front of him, and he looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just been told he had to keep carrying it a little longer. Our legal division will have the written confirmation to your attorney's office by 4:30 today, he said. The language will include the pause in the 60-day timeline. He paused. Regarding the list of other businesses, I've been authorized to provide a partial list, pending the review. Diane looked up. Partial. 8 businesses, active claims. We'll take it as a starting point, Diane said. She slid a legal pad across the table. Write them down. He looked at the legal pad. He looked at the pen she held out. For a moment, he didn't move, one final stubborn pause at the edge of a concession he couldn't take back. Then he took the pen and wrote. Savannah watched the pen move across the paper. 8 names, 8 businesses, 8 families who had been fighting alone, who didn't know what was in the box, who didn't know that a woman in Red Valley had been quietly, methodically collecting evidence that they were not isolated cases but pieces of a deliberate pattern. They would know now. Richard Hale put the pen down, pushed the legal pad back, stood up. His 2 companions stood with him. He looked at Savannah. There was nothing quite like defeat in his expression. He was too practiced for that, too armored. But there was something that had replaced the certainty he'd walked in with. Something that was doing its best to look neutral and was landing closer to careful. "Ms. Cole," he said, "for what it's worth, I was told this was a straightforward acquisition. I was told the owner would negotiate." Savannah looked at him. "And do you understand now why they were wrong?" He didn't answer, but the question sat there in the air between them, and she could see him deciding not to dismiss it the way he might have an hour ago. That was something. Not enough, but something. "I'll see you out," Marcus said. He said it with perfect politeness and absolute finality. Richard Hale and his companions walked out of Cole and Son's funeral home. The door closed behind them. Diane let out one slow breath. She picked up her coffee, which had gone cold. She drank it anyway. "That's a start," she said. "It's more than a start," Savannah said. "Yes," Diane conceded, "it is." She started collecting the documents, careful and organized, each one returned to its folder. "Savannah, the internal document, the one from November 2023. I need to know everything about how you came to have it, the source, the chain of custody, everything. If this goes where I think it's going to go, every piece of that provenance has to be airtight." "It is," Savannah said. "I've been careful." Diane looked at her. "I've been your attorney for 6 years. I know how careful you are." She paused. "I'm asking because I want to be sure you know what happens next. When this moves into the formal stage, it stops being something you're managing in a metal box in a locked cabinet. It becomes something other people manage. You become a witness, a claimant, a party to a larger action. Things move outside your control." Savannah was quiet for a moment. "Does that worry you?" she said. "On my behalf," Diane thought about it honestly. "A little." "Don't," Savannah said. "I've been working toward this for 2 years. I don't need to control it anymore. I just needed it to start." Diane nodded slowly. She closed the box and slid it across the table. "Keep this somewhere more secure than a locked cabinet. My office has a fireproof vault. I'd like to move it there today." "All right," Savannah said. They sat for a moment. The room was quiet. Outside the window, they could hear the faint sound of voices, the riders beginning to move, beginning to talk to each other now that the held breath quality of the morning had begun to release. Marcus looked out the window. "Kane's out there. You should talk to him before people start leaving." Savannah stood. She smoothed the front of her coat. She picked up her keys from the desk out of pure habit. Then she put them back down. She wasn't going anywhere, not yet. She walked to the front door and opened it. The cold October air came through, carrying with it the smell of autumn and exhaust, and something else. The specific, undefinable smell of a large number of people gathered in one place for a reason that mattered. She'd smelled it at every graveside service she'd ever attended. The smell of people showing up. Victor Kane was standing on the bottom step. A group of 6 or 7 riders stood nearby, talking low. When the door opened, the nearest ones looked up. Word moved through them quickly in the wordless way that word moves through a group that has been watching and waiting, a shift in posture, a turn of a head, the particular alertness of people who can feel that something has resolved. Victor looked up at her. He read her face, one quick, accurate read. "Done," he said. "For today," she said. "They're going to send written confirmation by 4:30. It's not over, but they're on record now. They can't pretend this didn't happen." Victor was quiet for a moment. He looked at the door of the SUV, which had pulled out of the lot while Richard was inside. She hadn't seen it go, but it was gone. He understood what he walked into. "I think," she said carefully, "that he's beginning to." "Good." Victor turned slightly to look at the riders around him. Something passed through the group, and easing a collective exhale, the tension of the morning, beginning to transform into something that wasn't relief exactly, but was adjacent to it. "What do you need from us going forward? I mean, not just today." Savannah looked at him. She had known Victor Kane for 20 years. She had never once asked him for anything beyond his trust. It had always felt important to maintain that line, not because she didn't feel the support, not because she doubted it, but because she believed the moment you started leaning on people's loyalty before they offered it, something changed in the relationship. Something essential. But today had been different. Today they had come without being asked. "There are 8 other businesses on a list I'm holding," she said. "Small places, family-owned. Your community probably knows some of them. If those owners are willing to talk to attorneys, to investigators, that's what I need. Witnesses, people who will say what happened to them out loud." Victor looked at her steadily. You know we know those businesses. I thought you might. Three of them are people we've worked with for years, he paused. This has been happening to more than just you. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then, give me the list. I'll make calls today. She pulled out her phone and photographed Diane's legal pad through the window. The handwriting clear, the 8 names distinct. She sent it to him. She watched his phone buzz in his pocket. He took it out, looked at the screen, put it back. Consider it done, he said. Savannah looked at him. She didn't have the words for what she wanted to say, not in any language she'd ever found adequate, because gratitude at this scale didn't fit cleanly into ordinary sentences, and she'd always been suspicious of people who made it sound easy. She said, your brother would have liked today. Victor made the same sound as before, the almost laugh. He would have hated every minute of it, he said. Then he would have told the story for the rest of his life and made himself the center of it. Savannah smiled, a real smile this time. The first one all day. Yeah, she said, he would have. She stood on the top step for a moment with the October cold around her and the road full of motorcycles and people who had come because 30 years of quietly doing the right thing had turned out to matter more than she'd ever let herself believe it might. She was 60 years old. She had gray at her temples and a locked cabinet that was now going to Diane's fireproof vault, and 8 names on a list and a 2-year-old promise to herself that today she had finally fully kept. She thought about her father, about the principle, about dress codes and dignity and what it meant to show up for someone when the rest of the world was looking the other way. She thought about Frances Dawson, who had stood straight at her husband's grave because he had believed she was the strongest person he knew. She thought about all of it, the whole long weight of it, and then she straightened her collar the way her father used to before he walked into a room, and she went back inside to do the rest of the work. Because in Savannah Cole's life, there was always more work, and she had never in 30 years left it undone. The written confirmation arrived at 4:17. Diane called Savannah the moment it hit her inbox. It's here, she said, and her voice had the particular quality of someone who had been holding their breath without realizing it and had just been permitted to stop. The language is exactly what we asked for. 60-day pause, no further action on the property, and they have acknowledged receipt of the documentation. A pause. Richard Hale's name isn't on it. Someone above him signed. What name? Savannah said. Thomas Greer. He's listed as Heritage Capital's regional legal director. Savannah wrote it down. She added it to the notes she'd been keeping since that morning, the same careful dated chronological notes she kept for everything. Old habit. Her father's habit before her. Is that significant? It means they escalated internally within 4 hours of leaving your building, Diane said. They didn't let this sit overnight. They didn't run it through standard process. Someone at a senior level looked at what Richard brought back and made a decision fast. Another pause, and Savannah could hear the sound of papers moving. That tells me the November document scared them more than anything else in that box. They know what it is. They know what it proves. And they know that the moment it enters formal legal proceedings, the story changes completely. Good, Savannah said. Savannah, Diane's voice shifted. I need you to understand something. What happened today bought us time and put them on notice. But Thomas Greer is not Richard Hale. Greer is the person they send when they want to actually solve a problem. He's going to study everything you have. He's going to find every weakness in the documentation, and he's going to come back in 60 days with a counter strategy that is considerably more sophisticated than what Richard walked in with this morning. Then we have 60 days to be more prepared than we are right now, Savannah said. A short silence. That's what I thought you'd say. Is that a problem? No, Diane said. It's exactly the right answer. I'm just making sure you understand what we're walking into. I've understood what we're walking into for 2 years, Savannah said. I've just been waiting for the right moment to start walking. She hung up. She sat at her desk in the quiet of the building. Marcus had gone home at 6. The service rooms were empty. The front door was locked, and she looked at the walls her father had built and felt something settle in her chest that was not quite peace, but was the closest thing to it she'd experienced in a very long time. Then her phone rang again. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. Is this Savannah Cole? A woman's voice. Careful, a little tight. It is. My name is Beverly Cho. I own Beverly's Dry Cleaning on Maple Street, in Red Valley. A pause. I got a call tonight from a man named Victor Kane. He said, another pause longer. He said you might have information about what Heritage Capital has been doing. He said, "You've been collecting evidence." Savannah closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she opened them. "Yes," she said, "that's right. They've had a lien on my building for 14 months, Beverly said. "I thought it was just me. I thought I'd made some mistake, missed something, that it was my fault." Her voice cracked on the last word, just barely, and then steadied. "I've been fighting this alone for over a year." "You're not alone," Savannah said. "You were never alone. You just didn't know the others existed yet." She picked up her pen. "Tell me everything. I'm going to write it all down. Take as long as you need." Beverly Cho talked for 45 minutes. She was the first call. She was not the last. By 9 o'clock that night, Savannah had spoken to 3 more business owners from Victor's list. By 10 o'clock, 2 more had left voicemails. Each story was different in its details and identical in its shape. The unexpected letter, the technical violation that came from nowhere, the pressure that arrived precisely when the business was most vulnerable, the sense of being alone in a fight against something too large to name. Savannah listened to every word. She wrote everything down. She did not tell them it would be easy or fast or simple, because none of those things were true, and she had no interest in managing people's hope in ways that would eventually cost them. What she told them was this: you were targeted because someone believed you would not fight back. You are fighting back. That is already more than they planned for. After the last call, she sat in the silence of her office for a long time. She was 60 years old and tired, in a way that went below the surface, the kind of tired that accumulated over years of absorbing other people's grief and carrying it with them through the door, and then setting it down carefully outside and leaving it there, because you could not take grief home with you. In this work, you could not let it follow you, or it would swallow you whole. 30 years of that. 30 years of being the person who held the space for loss so that other people could move through it. She had never regretted it. She wanted to be clear about that, even in the privacy of her own mind. She had never once regretted a single one of those rooms, those families, those hands held, and names remembered and stories witnessed. But tonight, sitting with the weight of 8 more stories added to the 2 years she'd already been carrying, she let herself feel the full mass of it for just a moment before she set it down. Then she locked the office, turned off the lights, and went home. The 60 days did not move slowly. 3 days after Richard Hale's visit, Diane filed a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office. She did not announce this publicly. She did not issue a statement. She simply filed it precisely and completely and sent Savannah a copy of the filing with a 2-line email that said, "It's in. Now we wait for them to respond to us instead of the other way around." 4 days after that, one of the business owners from Victor's list, a man named Gerald Fuqua, who ran an auto repair shop on the edge of town and had the reputation for being the most stubborn man in 3 counties, drove to Savannah's funeral home unannounced and sat down across from her and said, "I want to testify in whatever capacity is most useful. I have records going back 18 months, and I will put every single one of them in front of whoever needs to see them." He put a thick manila folder on her desk. "And I want you to know," he said, "that I almost sold 6 months ago. I came that close." He held up his thumb and forefinger an inch apart. "The only reason I didn't was because I made a promise to my father that I'd never let this building go to someone who didn't care about it. So I kept fighting even when I didn't have a reason to think it would matter." Savannah looked at the folder. She looked at Gerald Fuqua, who was 58 years old and had grease permanently embedded under his fingernails, and eyes that were exhausted and determined in equal measure. "It mattered," she said. "Every day you held on it mattered." He nodded once. "Just tell me what to do next. Keep your records organized. Don't discuss specifics with anyone except Diane Pierce. And don't let Heritage Capital into your building for any reason without your own attorney present." She paused. "Can you reach the other owners, the ones on Victor's list?" "Half of them are my customers," he said, "known them for years. Talk to them. Not about the legal specifics. Diane needs to handle that. Just let them know they're not alone. That's the most important thing right now. That's what they need to hear." He picked up his folder to leave. At the door, he stopped. He didn't turn around. "Ms. Cole, I heard what happened at the Dawson funeral, what that company tried to do." He paused. "I want you to know that if they try something like that again with your business, with any of ours, you've got people who will show up. Not just the Hells Angels, regular people too. A lot of us in this town have been watching what you do here for a long time. We just never had an occasion to say it out loud." He left. Savannah sat with that for a moment. Then she went back to work. 3 weeks into the 60 days, Thomas Greer called. He did not call Savannah, he called Diane. And then Diane called Savannah, and her voice had an edge that Savannah had never quite heard from her before. Not alarm, but heightened attention, the tone of someone who has just seen the chessboard reconfigure. Greer wants a meeting, Diane said, not adversarial. He used the word collaborative. He wants to explore, quote, a mutually beneficial resolution that addresses the concerns raised while protecting the interests of all parties. What does that actually mean? Savannah said. It means the Attorney General's filing got their attention faster than we expected. It means someone above Greer has done the math on what public exposure of the November document would cost the company, and the math is not good for Heritage Capital. A pause. It also means they're going to come to the table with an offer, and that offer is going to look generous enough to be tempting. But it won't be, Savannah said. Probably not. The first offer never is. Diane paused. Do you want to meet with him? Savannah thought about Beverly Cho, about Gerald Fuqua, about 6 other business owners who were right now organizing records and talking to each other and feeling, maybe for the first time in months, like the ground under their feet was slightly more solid than it had been. Yes, she said, set it up, but I want all 8 business owners informed before the meeting. They are part of this, whether Heritage Capital acknowledges it or not, and they have a right to know when conversations are happening. Agreed, Diane said immediately. I'll arrange a call. And one more thing, Savannah said. The meeting should be here, at the funeral home. A pause. At the funeral home. Yes. That's a deliberate choice, Diane said slowly. Everything I do is deliberate, Savannah said. She could hear the attorney almost smile. I'll tell them the location. The group call with the 8 business owners happened the following evening. Diane ran it. Savannah listened from her chair and spoke when there were questions only she could answer. The call lasted an hour and a half and ran through fear and anger and uncertainty and something that kept trying to become hope and wasn't quite there yet for most of them. Beverly Cho asked, what happens if their offer is good? What if we could actually get out from under these claims? Diane said, any settlement that protects you individually but allows Heritage Capital to continue its practices elsewhere is not a good offer. We want full withdrawal of claims, a public record of the company's practices, and enough structural consequence that they can't simply move their operation to the next county and start over. Beverly was quiet for a moment. That's a lot to ask for. Yes, Diane said, but you have a lot to ask with. She paused. The evidence Savannah has collected is not thin. The pattern is documented. The internal communication exists. What you need to decide is how long you are willing to hold. Because the longer you hold together, the more it costs them, and the more it costs them, the more they need a real resolution instead of a cosmetic one. Another silence longer this time. Savannah could hear the weight of it. 8 separate lives, 8 separate fears, 8 people who had been fighting alone and were now trying to figure out what it meant to fight together. Gerald Fuqua's voice came through. I'll hold, he said, simply. No elaboration. One by one, the others said the same. Beverly Cho was last. All right, she said, and it was only 2 words, but it carried everything: the fear she was overriding, the calculation she'd made, the decision to trust something larger than her individual circumstance. All right, we hold. Thomas Greer arrived at Cole & Sons Funeral Home on a Tuesday morning 3.5 weeks before the end of the 60-day window. He was not what Savannah expected. She had expected another version of Richard Hale, polished, armored, deliberate in his projection of control. Greer was in his mid-50s, compact with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of face that had been lived in thoroughly. He wore a suit that was good but not showy. He carried a single briefcase. He came alone. He looked at the building when he arrived, not appraisingly, not the way Richard had, but with the look of someone actually seeing it, taking in its age and its purpose and its particular quiet in the way that a person does when they are trying to understand something, rather than assess it. Marcus met him at the door. Diane was already inside. Savannah was at her desk. When Greer came through to the front room, Savannah was standing. She had decided this was not a sitting conversation, not yet. He extended his hand. His grip was firm, but not performative. Ms. Cole, thank you for agreeing to meet. Mr. Greer, she said, sit down. He sat. He placed his briefcase on the floor beside him, not on the table. He looked at the room briefly, respectfully, and then at her. I want to say something before we start, he said. She waited. I've reviewed the file. Everything you collected, everything your attorney submitted. He paused. I've been with Heritage Capital for 9 years. I've overseen a lot of acquisitions. I was not aware of the specific practices your documentation describes. He said it evenly, not as a defense, not as an excuse, more like a man dropping something heavy in a specific place so everyone in the room could see exactly where it landed. I'm not asking you to accept that. I'm just telling you because I think you deserve the truth about where I'm coming from. Savannah studied him. She had been in rooms with a lot of people over 30 years who were trying to manage impressions, and she had become very good at reading the difference between a performance of honesty and the actual thing. She was not entirely sure yet which this was. What are you authorized to offer? She said. He opened his briefcase. He pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. Full withdrawal of all claims against your property. Withdrawal of all claims against the 7 other businesses identified in your filing. He opened the folder. A structured settlement providing compensation to each affected business for documented financial damages incurred during the dispute period. An internal policy review conducted by independent auditors of Heritage Capital's acquisition practices in this region. He paused. And a commitment formal in writing to a set of operational standards that would prevent the recurrence of the practices described in your documentation. Me personally, Diane had her legal pad out. She was writing without looking up. Define structured settlement. Define documented financial damages. Define commitment. I want specific language for every one of those terms. I have draft language, Greer said. He began pulling additional pages from the folder. Savannah sat down. She watched Greer and Diane move into the dense, precise work of legal language. Every word contested, every phrase examined, every definition tested for the gap between what it appeared to say and what it actually bound either party to. This was Diane's territory, and she was ruthless in it, and Savannah let her be staying present, but back watching not just the words but the man across the table. I was careful, more careful than Richard. He pushed back on some things and conceded others quickly, and the pattern of what he pushed back on and what he let go told her something. He was genuinely trying to close this. Not because he'd been ordered to appease them, she could feel the difference, but because he had looked at the November document and understood what it meant. And he had decided that the only path forward that didn't end badly for everyone involved was a real resolution. That didn't make him an ally. That didn't mean she trusted Heritage Capital or anything it promised. But it meant this conversation was different from the last one, and she needed to stay clear-eyed about that difference. An hour in, Diane sat back. The language on the operational standards needs to be significantly stronger. What you've drafted is aspirational. It describes intentions. I want it to describe obligations with measurable metrics and specific consequences for non-compliance. Greer looked at the page. I can take that back and revise. I need it revised and returned within 5 days, Diane said. He nodded. That's possible. One more thing, Diane said. She looked at Savannah. This was the moment they'd discussed. The thing that hadn't been in the initial filing, the piece Savannah had been holding in reserve. Savannah looked at Greer. The November document, she said. His expression shifted, just slightly. What about it? The source of that document is a former Heritage Capital employee. Her name is Laura Sims. She worked for the company for 11 years, and she left 18 months ago. Savannah held his gaze. She kept records because she believed what the company was doing was wrong, and she didn't know how to stop it from the inside. She came to me because she didn't know who else to trust. A pause. She needs protection. Formal, legal, documented protection from any retaliation, professional or otherwise, from Heritage Capital or any of its affiliated entities. Greer was very still. That is non-negotiable, Savannah said. Everything else on this table we can discuss. We can negotiate language. We can find middle ground. Laura Sims's protection is not on the table for discussion. It is a condition. The room was extremely quiet. Greer looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He was doing the calculations. She could see it running the math on what agreeing to this meant, what it exposed, what it implicitly acknowledged about the company's conduct and the validity of the November document. Then he looked up. I'll need to make a call, he said. Make it, Savannah said. He took his phone and stepped into the hallway. Diane leaned towards Savannah and said very low, You didn't tell me about Sims. I know, Savannah said equally low. Why not? Because I didn't know if I was going to use it today. I needed to see who he was first. Diane looked at her for a moment. And he's the real thing, Savannah said. He actually wants to fix it, which means he needs something to take back to his company that justifies the settlement from their side. The Sims protection gives him that it acknowledges her existence, which means the document is implicitly authenticated, which means they can argue internally that the settlement was the strategic choice rather than the losing one. She paused. It costs them face on the outside and saves them something on the inside. He can sell it. Diane stared at her. You figured all of that out in the last hour. I've had 2 years to think about this conversation, Savannah said. Greer came back in after 7 minutes. He sat down. He placed his phone on the table. We can include the Sims provision, he said. Formal non-retaliation agreement legally binding with damages structured for breach, he paused. I want it on record that I'm recommending this to my company's leadership, not because we're forced to, but because it's right. Savannah looked at him. Put that in writing too, she said. He blinked. I'm sorry. If you believe it's right, say so in the settlement document. Not legal language, plain English. A statement from Heritage Capital's regional legal director, acknowledging that the practice described in this filing cause harm and that the company is committed to ensuring they do not recur. She paused. That statement will not be used against the company in future litigation if the commitments in this settlement are honored. But it needs to exist. The families who fought this alone for over a year deserve to see it written down. I was quiet for a long time, longer than any pause in the meeting so far. Marcus, standing near the door, had gone completely still. Diane's pen was not moving. Greer looked at the folder in front of him. He looked at the walls of the room, the photographs, the small and careful details of a space that had held grief for over 50 years. He looked at Savannah Cole's 60 years old, plain black coat, gold cross, the steadiest person he had sat across from in 9 years of doing this work. All right, he said. 2 words, identical to Beverly Cho's on the phone, carrying the same weight from an entirely different direction toward the same point. Savannah nodded. Diane will draft the statement language, she said. We'll have it to you within 48 hours. If you can confirm the revised operational standards within 5 days as agreed, I believe we can conclude this within the remaining window. Understood, Greer said. He began collecting the papers from the table. Careful, organized. He paused at the November document. Diane had placed a copy in the folder for the meeting, and he looked at it for a moment without picking it up. Ms. Cole, he said, not looking up, the employee who gave you this, Sims. He paused. Is she all right? The question was unexpected. Savannah took a moment. She's rebuilding, she said. It wasn't easy for her, leaving a job she'd had for 11 years because she couldn't reconcile what she was seeing with who she was. A pause. She'll be all right. He nodded. He didn't say anything else. He picked up his briefcase and stood. At the door, he stopped, and Savannah thought he was going to say something formal. A closing line, a professional courtesy. Instead, he said, my grandmother ran a dry cleaning business for 30 years in Ohio. Small place, 2 employees, loyal customers. She died in it, basically still running the counter at 78. He paused. I don't know how I ended up doing work that targets places like that. He said it to the door, not to her. I'm going to think about that for a while. Then he left. The door closed. Marcus exhaled. That was either the most sincere thing I've ever seen in a professional setting, he said, or the best performance. It was sincere, Savannah said. How do you know? He mentioned his grandmother, she said. Nobody uses their grandmother in a performance. There's no angle in it. She picked up her coffee. He'll do what he said he'd do. The people above him might override him. That's the risk we're still carrying, but he'll do what he said. Diane was already drafting. Her pen moved fast across the legal pad. Statement language, she said, more to herself than to them. Plain English, acknowledgement of harm, commitment to change. She looked up. This is either going to be the thing that makes this settlement stick or the thing that blows it up entirely when Greer's bosses read it. I know, Savannah said. You pushed anyway. Those 8 families spent months thinking it was their fault, Savannah said. Beverly Cho told me she thought she'd made a mistake. A mistake. She blamed herself for something a corporation did deliberately. She set down the coffee. They deserved to see it written down in plain English that it wasn't their mistake. that it was done to them on purpose, that someone with the company's name attached knows it was wrong. She paused. That's not negotiable. It never was. Diane looked at her for a long moment. Then she went back to writing. Outside, the afternoon was quiet. No motorcycles today, no crowd on the road. Just Red Valley going about its ordinary business, the hardware store, and the diner, and the gas station, and the people who had lived here long enough to have buried their parents here and expected their children would bury them. Victor Kane called at 3:30. How'd it go, he said. Better than expected, Savannah said. Not done yet, but better. The others are asking, he said. Beverly, Gerald, the rest of them. Tell them we're holding, she said. Tell them the statement is coming. The one that says it out loud. A pause. The company's actually going to admit it. One person inside the company is going to say it in writing, she said. We're still fighting to make it stick. But yes, someone is going to say it out loud. Victor was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. Daniel would have wanted to know this happened, he said. He would have wanted to know his funeral mattered beyond his funeral. Savannah felt the catch in her chest that she'd been keeping off her face all day. It did, she said, every bit of it. She hung up. She sat at her desk in the quiet of late afternoon. The papers were spread in front of her. The box was gone in Diane's vault, now safe. The work was still in motion. The ending was not written. But something had shifted. Something fundamental and real had moved in the machinery of this fight, and she could feel it the way you feel the ground change under your feet when you've been walking uphill for a long time and the slope finally begins to ease. She was not done. She knew that. There were weeks still ahead, negotiations and language, and the risk that someone above Greer would decide the cost was too high and pull back from the table and make her start over from a different position. But today, for the first time in 2 years, Savannah Cole allowed herself to believe that it was going to work. Not because she was certain. She was never certain of things she couldn't control. But because 8 people had said they would hold, and one man had mentioned his grandmother, and a woman named Laura Sims was going to have her name in a legal document that said the company could not touch her. And because Daniel Dawson had gone into the ground with dignity the way he deserved, and because her father had opened a door 35 years ago and taught her something she had spent her entire life trying to live up to. She looked at the wall, at his photograph, at the steady, certain face of a man who had never once questioned whether the right thing was worth doing. She picked up her pen. She went back to work. The revised operational standards arrived in 4 days, not 5. Diane called Savannah at 7:45 in the morning before the coffee was even finished brewing. Greer sent them overnight, she said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite excitement. Diane, Pierce did not do excitement, professionally speaking, but was the closest thing to it that her particular register allowed. The language is stronger than what we asked for. Savannah set down her mug. Stronger how? The metrics are specific, not aspirational, actual numbers, actual timelines, actual consequences written into the document for non-compliance. And there's something else. A pause, the kind Diane used when she was making sure she had the right words. He included the statement, plain English, exactly the way you described it. Savannah was quiet. He fought for it internally, Diane said. I can tell from the revision history embedded in the document he sent 3 versions before this one. The earlier versions had the statement stripped out. This final one has it put back in, and the language is actually stronger than what I drafted. Another pause. Someone above him tried to remove it. He put it back. Savannah thought about a man who had mentioned his grandmother at the door of a funeral home. She thought about the particular weight of a person deciding in a professional context that something mattered more than strategy. Call the group, she said. All 8, tonight if possible. They need to hear this before we respond to Greer. Already scheduled for 7, Diane said. I had a feeling. One more thing, Savannah said. Laura Sims, she needs to be on that call. A pause. She's not a party to the settlement negotiations formally. No, Savannah said, but she's the reason any of this is possible. She deserves to hear what her courage produced. Diane was quiet for a moment. I'll add her, she said. The call that night had 11 people on it. 8 business owners, Diane, Savannah, and Laura Sims, who had driven from Nashville 3 hours alone without being asked, because when Savannah had called to tell her about the statement, she'd said quietly, I'd like to hear it read out loud, if that's all right. I'd like to hear someone read it out loud. Diane read it at 7:14, after she'd walked everyone through the operational standards and the settlement terms and answered 40 minutes of questions with the patient precision of someone who had explained hard things to frighten people many times and had never once made them feel stupid for asking. The statement was 11 sentences. Savannah had them memorized by now, but she listened to Diane read them as if hearing them for the first time because she wanted to experience what the others were experiencing. It said that Heritage Capital Group acknowledged that its acquisition practices in Red Valley and the surrounding county had caused direct financial harm to small business owners through the deliberate exploitation of technical legal vulnerabilities during periods of economic vulnerability. It said this was wrong. It used that word. Wrong, not inadvisable, not suboptimal, not contrary to company values. Wrong. It said the company was committed to remediation and to structural change that would prevent recurrence, and it said in the final sentence in the plain English that Savannah had required that the individuals and families affected had done nothing to deserve what had been done to them, and that the fault was entirely the company's own. When Diane finished, the line was silent. Beverly Cho spoke first. Her voice was thick. "Can you read the last sentence again?" Diane read it again. Another silence. Gerald Fuca said, "Well, just that one word, and it carried a year and a half of fighting in it." Laura Sims didn't say anything on the call, but when it ended and Savannah called her back directly, she picked up after one ring and said, "I kept thinking I'd done the wrong thing, leaving, taking those documents. I kept thinking maybe I should have stayed and tried harder to fix it from the inside." A breath. Hearing that tonight, hearing them say it, I don't know. It feels like it was worth it. All of it. "It was worth it," Savannah said. "Every part of it." "Are you sure it's going to hold?" Laura said. "The settlement. Are you sure they won't just—" "Nothing is certain," Savannah said. "But we have Greer's signature, and we have the record of him fighting his own company to keep that statement in the document. That's a person who is going to hold the line. And if the company tries to reverse course, we have everything we started with, plus the settlement attempt on record." She paused. "They've already shown their hand twice. Once when Richard walked through my door, and once when someone above Greer tried to remove the statement. We know who they are. They know we know. That changes what's possible for them." Laura was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay." The word had the sound of someone putting something down that they had been carrying for a very long time. "Thank you, Savannah." "Thank yourself," Savannah said. "You're the one who kept the records. You're the one who came to me. You did that alone before anyone else knew the pattern existed. Everything that happened after Beverly and Gerald and all of them started with you." After she hung up, she sat in the quiet of her office for a moment. The kind of quiet that has texture, not empty, but full of things that have just been resolved. She looked at the wall where her father's photograph hung. She thought about telling him. She had done that her whole adult life, imagined telling her father things, having the conversation in her head that she could no longer have in person. It was one of the ways grief worked, she knew. One of the ways love persisted past its object. She told him, in her head in the quiet. She told him what had happened. She imagined his face, the steadiness of it, the absence of surprise. Because he would not have been surprised, she thought. He would have nodded and said something simple and certain the way he always did. He would have said, "Of course it worked. You did it right." She turned off the light and went home. The settlement was signed 17 days before the end of the 60-day window. It happened in Diane's office, neutral ground. Diane had insisted and Savannah had agreed. Thomas Greer came with one colleague. Diane came with Savannah. The 8 business owners were not present for the signing itself, but Diane had arranged for a conference line that stayed open throughout, muted on their end, so that each of them could listen in real time as the papers were executed. Greer signed his name in 4 places. His colleague witnessed. Diane signed. Savannah signed. The pen moved across the paper with the particular quiet of a thing that has been fought for and is now finally becoming real. When it was done, Greer sat back. He looked across the table at Savannah. He looked tired, not the tired of someone who had lost, but the tired of someone who had done something difficult and was still processing the cost of it. "For what it's worth," he said, "what's in this document is going to create significant internal pressure at Heritage Capital. There are people in that company who are not going to be happy about the statement." "I know," Savannah said. "Some of them are going to look for ways around it." I know that too. She held his gaze. That's why the document has teeth. And that's why Laura Sims's protection is in there with specific breach consequences. She paused. Mr. Greer, you fought to keep the statement in. You know as well as I do what that cost you internally. He didn't deny it. I'm asking you to keep fighting, she said. Not for me, not even for the 8 families in this county, but for the next county and the one after that. Because this pattern didn't start here, and it won't end here unless someone inside Heritage Capital keeps saying the same thing you said in that statement. She paused. That it was wrong. He looked at her for a long moment. His colleague was very still beside him. Diane was writing on her legal pad, but Savannah could tell she wasn't actually writing, she was listening. I can't promise outcomes, Greer said finally. I can only tell you what I'm going to do. Then tell me, Savannah said. I'm going to recommend a full operational review of every active acquisition file in the company's regional portfolio, he said. I'm going to flag every case that fits the pattern described in this settlement. And I'm going to put my name on that recommendation, he paused. People above me may override it, but my name will be on it. And if they override it, I'll have a decision to make about whether I want to keep working for people who do that. The room was extremely still. Savannah said, Laura Sims worked for Heritage Capital for 11 years. She tried to change things from the inside. She couldn't. She left and she kept records and she came to me because she did not know what else to do. She paused. I hope you have better luck than she did. I genuinely do. But if you don't, if you find yourself at that same wall, you know where I am. Something moved across Greer's face that she could not quite name. It wasn't gratitude and it wasn't discomfort. It was the look of a person receiving information they are going to carry with them for a long time, whether they want to or not. I know where you are, he said. They shook hands. He left. The door closed. On the conference line, 11 seconds of silence. Then Beverly Cho's voice, Is it done? It's done, Diane said. The sound that came through the line was not cheering. It was quieter than that, the collective exhale of people who had been braced for impact for so long that the absence of it felt strange. Gerald Fuqua said something that might have been a prayer. Someone else laughed short and surprised, like laughter that arrived before they expected it. Savannah pressed the mute button on her end and let them have the moment. She looked at Diane. Thank you, she said. Diane waved it off in the particular way she waved off things that meant the most to her. Don't thank me. Thank yourself and your father and whoever taught him. She capped her pen. Now we have work to do. This settlement requires 60 days of monitoring before the withdrawal of claims is formally complete. I need you sharp for the next 2 months. I'm always sharp, Savannah said. You're always sharp and always exhausted, Diane said. Go home. Sleep. Come back tomorrow and we'll build the monitoring schedule. She paused. And Savannah, for what it's worth, in 26 years of practicing law in this county, I have never seen anyone fight something like this the way you did. Without noise, without announcement, just building, piece by piece, waiting for the right moment. She paused again. Your father would have been proud. Savannah looked at the table. I know, she said. He would have also told me I took too long to bring it to an attorney. Diane almost smiled. He would have been right. The news broke 12 days later. Not because Savannah released it, not because Diane called a journalist. It broke because one of the 8 business owners, not Gerald, not Beverly, but a quiet man named Tom Patel who ran a small pharmacy on the east side of Red Valley and had said almost nothing on any of the group calls. Tom Patel told his story to his cousin, who told it to a friend, who happened to be a freelance journalist based in Nashville, who had been looking for exactly this kind of story for 2 years and recognized it immediately for what it was. The journalist called Diane first. Diane called Savannah. A reporter has the broad outlines, she said. She got it from the community, not from us. She's asking for a comment. What does she want to know? Savannah said. Everything. The settlement, the pattern, the funeral that started it, the Hell's Angels. A pause. She's particularly interested in you. Savannah was quiet for a moment. She had spent 30 years being the person in the background of other people's stories. The facilitator, the witness, the woman who made space for other people's moments. The idea of being at the center of a story, her own story told publicly, sat uncomfortably. I don't want it to be about me, she said. I know, Diane said, but here's the thing. If you don't talk to her, she writes what she has. which is a good story, a true story. But it's missing the texture that makes people understand what actually happened. The 30 years, your father, the reason the community showed up. A pause. If you talk to her, you can make sure the story isn't just about a corporate settlement. You can make sure it's about what the settlement means for families like the Dawsons, for Beverly Cho, for all the people who spent months thinking it was their fault. Savannah looked at her father's photograph on the wall. She thought about Beverly Cho saying, "I thought I'd made a mistake." She thought about Laura Sims driving 3 hours alone to hear 11 sentences read out loud. She picked up her phone. "Give me the journalist's number," she said. Her name was Sarah Okonkwo. She was 34, originally from Atlanta, and she had the particular energy of someone who had gotten very good at making people comfortable enough to tell her the truth. She came to Red Valley in person, drove up from Nashville the morning after Diane called, and she sat across from Savannah in the front room of Cole & Sons, and she asked questions for 3 hours. She asked about the business. She asked about Savannah's father. She asked about Michael Iron Dawson, about the night 35 years ago when a door was opened that changed everything. She asked about the 2 years of building the case, the metal box, the document from Laura Sims, the 45-minute phone call from Beverly Cho that had started at 9 o'clock at night. She asked about the morning of Daniel Dawson's funeral. She asked about standing on the front steps and looking at Richard Hale and not blinking. She asked about Victor Kane. "What did it mean to you," Sarah said, "when they arrived, when you saw them on the road?" Savannah thought about the question for a moment. She was careful with her answers in this conversation, not guarded, not performing, but precise. She wanted every word to be the right one. "It didn't surprise me," she said finally. "That sounds like it should be more dramatic, I know. But it didn't, because I had learned a long time ago that when you treat people with genuine respect, not as a transaction, not because you want something from them, but because you actually believe they deserve it, people remember. They carry it, and sometimes when you need them, they bring it back to you." She paused. "I wasn't surprised they came. I would have been surprised if they hadn't." Sarah looked at her. "Some people would say that the Hells Angels are a complicated community to be associated with, that there are people who would question." "Some people would," Savannah said. "Those are people who have never sat in a room with a Hells Angels family while they're saying goodbye to someone they love." She held the journalist's gaze. Grief is the same in every person, in every community, in every family, regardless of what they look like or what jacket they wear or what assumptions the world makes about them. I have been in that room thousands of times. The grief is always the same. The love is always the same. A pause. Anyone who looks at a man crying over his brother's casket and sees anything other than a man who loved his brother, that is a failure of the person looking, not the person grieving. Sarah wrote for a moment without speaking. Then she looked up. "Is there anything you want people to understand about this story? Anything that you think might get lost?" Savannah thought about it. She looked at the room, the walls, the photographs, the quiet, ordinary permanence of a place that had held 50 years of loss and love in equal measure. "The people heritage capital targeted," she said. "Beverly Cho, Gerald Fuqua, Tom Patel, the others. These are not extraordinary people in the way that word usually gets used. They're not famous. They're not powerful. They are people who woke up every morning and opened their doors and served their community and tried to build something that would outlast them." She paused. "They were targeted precisely because someone calculated that ordinary people don't fight back. That's what I want people to understand. That calculation was wrong. It is always wrong. Ordinary people are the ones who built this country piece by piece, business by business, family by family. And when you tell them that what they built doesn't matter, when you use paperwork and legal pressure and deliberate cruelty to take away what they made with their hands, you are wrong about who they are. You will always be wrong about that." She stopped. The room was quiet. Sarah looked down at her notepad. She looked up. Her expression was carefully professional, but there was something underneath it that was not professional at all. The look of someone who has just heard something they're going to carry with them. "One last question," she said. "What happens now for you personally, for the funeral home, for Red Valley?" "Now," Savannah said, "I unlock the door every morning. I make my coffee. I prepare for another day of helping families say goodbye to people they love." She paused. "Nothing about that changes. The work doesn't change. What changed is that 8 families know they're not alone, and one company knows that ordinary people will not simply surrender when pressured. She paused again. And maybe someone inside Heritage Capital is going to fight to make sure this doesn't happen to the next county. I don't know if that's true. I hope it is. She looked at Sarah directly. But that's not something I control. All I can control is what I do when I open this door every morning. And I intend to keep opening it. Sarah closed her notebook. She drove back to Nashville that afternoon and she wrote for 3 days without stopping. And the story she published on the 14th day after the settlement signing ran in a regional outlet that had 300,000 readers and then was picked up by 2 national publications the following morning, and then a cable news segment ran a version of it the day after that, and within 72 hours of the story going live, Savannah Cole's phone was receiving more calls than it had in any 3-month period of her life. She answered the ones she recognized. She let Diane handle the others. She did not change how she came to work in the morning. She did not change the way she ran the building, or treated the families who came through the door, or made her coffee, or straightened her collar in the mirror before the day began. She had spent 30 years building something, and the thing she had built was not in any newspaper and would not be affected by any newspaper, and she knew that. But Victor called and he said the piece had been shared in communities she'd never heard of by people she'd never met, and that 3 of those people had sent messages asking for the names of small businesses in their own towns that might be facing the same pressure because they wanted to do what the people in Red Valley had done. She wrote those names down. She passed them to Diane, and then she got back to work. Frances Dawson called 6 weeks after the settlement. Savannah was at her desk when the phone rang and she saw the name and picked up immediately. "I've been meaning to call for weeks," Frances said. "I kept not knowing what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Savannah said. "I know, but I want to." A breath. "I've been reading about what happened after Daniel's funeral, what you did." A pause. "Daniel knew, you know. Not specifically, but he said to me months before he passed, he said, 'Frances, there's something happening with Savannah's business. And I want you to know that when it comes to a head, I want her to have whatever she needs from us.' He didn't know what he was offering. He just knew he wanted to offer it." Savannah sat with that, the weight of it, the particular specific weight of being known by someone who was gone, of being understood by a person before the moment came that would explain why the understanding mattered. "He was a good man," Savannah said. "How was the best one I knew," Frances said simply. "I want you to know that I believe his funeral, the trouble that happened that morning, the way people showed up, I believe it served a purpose. I believe Daniel would have been proud of that. That his last day on this earth was the day that started something worth starting." She paused. "He would have complained that nobody asked his opinion about it, of course." Savannah laughed, really laughed, the kind that arrives before you decide to let it. "He would have had opinions," she agreed. "He always had opinions," Frances said, and she was laughing too, and they stayed in it together for a moment. The laughter that exists right at the edge of grief, that is maybe the purest expression of love for someone gone, the ability to find the funny thing in the loss. When the laughter settled, Frances said, "Thank you, Savannah, for Daniel, for everything after, for not letting them win." "Thank you for letting me be there," Savannah said. "Every part of it." After she hung up, she held the phone in her hand for a moment. She thought about Daniel Dawson, who had told his wife months before his death that when the trouble came, he wanted Savannah to have whatever she needed. She thought about a community that showed up without being asked. She thought about Laura Sims driving 3 hours to hear 11 sentences. She thought about Gerald Fuqua and the promise he'd made to his father. She thought about Beverly Cho saying all right. She thought about her own father, about the principle he'd built this building on, about the door he'd opened 35 years ago that had made all the rest of it possible. She thought about how the things that mattered most were almost never loud. They were almost never announced. They accumulated quietly over years and decades in the ordinary choices of ordinary people, deciding what kind of person to be in the small moments that nobody was watching. She thought he taught me that. He handed it to me, and I carried it. And now it did what it was supposed to do. She set the phone down. She straightened her collar. She went back to work because in Red Valley, Tennessee, at Cole & Son's funeral home, the door opened every morning at the same time. The coffee was made. The families came. The grief was witnessed and honored and held with the care it deserved. And the woman who ran it had learned something, confirmed something she had always suspected but never had occasion to test at this particular scale. That kindness was not soft, it was not passive, it was not the absence of strength. Kindness was the longest game there was. It accumulated interest over decades. It built alliances in rooms that power didn't know existed. It showed up 38 bikes at a time without being asked. And when the moment came that required it to be more than kindness, when it needed to become evidence, testimony in a legal filing, a statement in plain English that said wrong, it was ready, because Savannah Cole had been ready. From the moment she'd inherited these walls and her father's principle and the small gold cross her mother had pressed into her hands, she had been ready. And she had waited with the patience of a person who knew the difference between the right moment and the merely convenient one until the day that required everything she had, and then she had given it. Every single piece. The monitoring period ended on a Thursday. Diane called at 8:03 in the morning before Savannah had finished her first cup of coffee, and she said 4 words. All claims formally withdrawn. Then she added every single one. Heritage Capital filed the paperwork with the county yesterday at 4:58, 2 minutes before close of business. They waited until the last possible moment, which tells you everything about how much they wanted to do it, but they did it. A pause. It's done, Savannah. Legally, formally, permanently done. Savannah set down her coffee mug. She looked at the wall. She breathed. In and out, slow and even, the way she had been breathing through hard things her entire life. All 8, she said. All 8. Beverly's dry cleaning, Gerald's shop, Tom Patel's pharmacy, every single business on that list. Every line, every zoning challenge, every technical claim withdrawn. On the record, permanent. Diane paused and her voice shifted into something that was quieter and more personal than her professional register. I want you to know something. I've been practicing law in this county for 26 years. I have never seen a case like this. Not because of the outcome, although the outcome is remarkable, because of how it got here. She stopped. You built this. Every piece of it. For 2 years quietly without any guarantee it would ever work, and it worked. Savannah looked at her father's photograph on the wall, the steady eyes, the certain face. It worked, she agreed. She called Victor first. He picked up on the second ring the way he always did, as if he had been expecting the call. It's done, she said. All 8, withdrawn. Silence on the line. Not the silence of surprise. Victor Kane was not a man who was surprised by things he had already decided to believe in. It was the silence of a person receiving confirmation of something they had held on to through doubt and waiting in the particular faith that comes not from certainty, but from choice. Daniel would have given you so much grief about how long it took, he said. He would have had opinions, she said. He would have called you every week asking for updates. He would have called Marcus, she said, because he knew I'd tell him to be patient, and he didn't want to hear it. Victor made the sound that was not quite a laugh and was better than one. Then his voice went serious. What happens now for the business owners? Diane is working with each of them on the compensation structures. The financial remediation should begin processing within 30 days. Gerald's already talking to his accountant. Beverly called me last night. She's been approved for a small renovation loan that she couldn't get before because the line was on the property. The lien is gone now. Savannah paused. They're building again. That's what happens now. And you, Victor said, what happens for you? Savannah looked around her office, the desk her father had bought in 1971, the chair she'd had reupholstered twice, the filing cabinet in the corner with 30 years of records inside, every family documented, every name remembered. I opened the door, she said, same as every morning. Victor was quiet for a moment, then, I need to tell you something. I've been meaning to for a while. Since the day of Daniel's funeral, actually. He stopped, started again. There are people in our community, Savannah, people who've been through things that the ordinary world doesn't really know how to hold. Loss that doesn't fit the standard script. Grief that gets complicated by who people assume you are before they know anything about you. He paused. You have been the person who held that space for 30 years, without announcement, without asking for anything back. You held it. And I want you to know that it mattered in ways you probably cannot fully see from where you're standing, because you're too close to it. Savannah felt the familiar catch in her chest that she kept off her face, Except that today, alone in her office with only her father's photograph watching, she let it stay for a moment. "Thank you," she said. It was inadequate, and it was everything she had. "Don't thank me," Victor said. "I'm telling you a fact." She hung up. She sat with the fact for a minute. Then she called Beverly Cho. Beverly answered on the first ring and immediately said, "I know, Diane called me 20 minutes ago. I've been sitting in my car outside my building because I couldn't make myself go inside yet." A breath. 14 months I've been fighting this. 14 months of not sleeping right, not being able to think about the future without this weight on top of everything. And it's just, she stopped. It's gone. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to feel something being gone when you've been carrying it so long. "You feel it slowly," Savannah said, "a little at a time. You go inside your building, you open your door, you do the work of the day, and slowly over days and weeks, the weight doesn't come back. And one morning you wake up and you realize you slept through the night without thinking about it once. That's when you'll know it's really gone." Beverly was quiet for a moment. "Is that what happened to you after something hard? Does it really go away like that?" Savannah thought about her father dying, thought about the first year of running the business alone, of being 32 years old and responsible for other people's worst days without anyone beside her who had done it before. "It changes," she said honestly. "It doesn't disappear exactly, but it becomes lighter. It becomes something you carry differently. Not on top of you, more like beside you." She paused. "Go inside your building, Beverly. Go open your door." She heard Beverly breathe. Then, "Okay." The word that meant I'm going to do the hard thing. The word Beverly Cho used when she made decisions that cost her something. "Okay, I'm going." She hung up. Savannah finished her coffee. She straightened her collar. She unlocked the front door of Cole & Sons Funeral Home and stepped into the morning. 3 weeks after the final withdrawal, Thomas Greer called. Not Diane, Savannah directly on her personal line, which meant he had gone through channels to get the number, which itself was a choice that said something. She almost didn't recognize the voice at first. He sounded different, less armored. "Ms. Cole, I hope this isn't an intrusion." "Mr. Greer," she said, "it isn't. I wanted to let you know something. Personally, not through counsel." He paused. "I submitted the operational review recommendation 3 weeks ago. The full portfolio, every active acquisition file in the regional division, every case flagged against the pattern described in our settlement." Another pause. "It was accepted. The review is underway. An independent auditor starts next week." Savannah sat down. "Were you overruled?" "Not this time," he said. 3 people above him pushed back. One of them pushed back hard, but the story, Sarah Okonkwo's story, had been picked up by that point, and the company's communications team had done the math on what another news cycle would cost versus what the review would cost, and the math came down on my side." He paused. "I'm not proud that the math was what moved them rather than the principle, but I'll take the outcome." "Sometimes the math and the principle reach the same place," Savannah said. "The important thing is that they got there." "I wanted to tell you something else," he said. "Laura Sims, I looked at her personnel file. I read every review she received in 11 years. He stopped. "She was exceptional. Every supervisor said so. She was thorough and principled, and she flagged concerns through proper channels twice before she left. Both times she was told the concerns were outside her scope." His voice had an edge to it that was quiet but clear. "She should never have been put in a position where taking documents home was the only option she had left. That was a failure of the company. I want to say that plainly." Savannah listened. "I can't undo what she went through," he said. "I can only make sure the review catches every case like hers still in progress and closes them properly." He paused. "But I wanted you to know that I see it. I see what it cost her, and I don't think she should have had to pay that." "Tell her," Savannah said. He was quiet. "I'm sorry. Tell her yourself. She has the same number you used to reach me. Call her and say what you just said." Savannah paused. She drove 3 hours alone to hear a settlement read out loud because she needed to know her 11 years at that company had counted for something. Give her the direct version. She's earned it. A long silence. "All right," he said, "I will." "Mr. Greer," she paused. "Thank you for holding the line inside." "Thank you," he said, "for building the line worth holding." I hung up. She held the phone for a moment. Then she put it in her pocket and went back to the front room where Marcus was setting up for a 10 o'clock consultation. He looked at her face. He could always read her face. "Good news," he said. "Greer's review got approved," she said. Marcus stopped what he was doing. He set down the flowers he'd been repositioning and looked at her fully. "The full portfolio, independent auditor, starts next week." I was quiet for a moment. Then, "So it's not just Red Valley." "No," she said, "it's not just Red Valley." He put the flowers back where they'd been. He straightened up. He had the look of someone doing math in their head, not financial math, but the other kind. The kind where you try to calculate the scale of a consequence you cannot fully see. How many businesses in a full regional portfolio? Across how many counties? "I don't know the exact number," Savannah said. "Diane estimates potentially 30 to 40 active cases fitting the pattern." Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then he said very quietly, 30 to 40 families. "Yes. Who don't know yet that someone is coming to help." She looked at him. He was 29 years old and he had the face of someone who had just understood something that was going to change how he thought about his work for a long time. "Not yet," she said, "but they will." The consultation arrived at 10. A daughter and her two brothers mid-40s, all three of them recently lost their mother, and navigating the particular difficulty of grief that comes tangled with the logistics of sudden responsibility. The decisions, the paperwork, the having to be practical about something that felt entirely impractical. Savannah met them at the door. She looked each of them in the eye. She said their names. She brought them inside and she sat with them and she listened. This was what it was always about. This room, these people, this grief. This was the thing she had been protecting. Not the building her father had told her once that a building was just walls and walls could be rebuilt. What could not be rebuilt was the trust that lived inside them. The knowledge passed between families in the particular way that important knowledge traveled in small towns quietly word of mouth. A recommendation offered at a kitchen table or a church pew or a backyard fence that this was the place where you would not be managed or processed or made to feel like a transaction. This was the place where someone would sit with you and mean it. That was what Heritage Capital had been trying to buy. They hadn't known what they were looking at. They had seen a building on land with good zoning and a small business owner who might fold under pressure, and they had not understood, had fundamentally completely failed to understand that what they were trying to displace was not a building at all. It was a covenant, 30 years of kept promises, 30 years of doors opened and names remembered and grief witnessed without flinching. You could not put that in a manila envelope. You could not file a lien against it. You could not stop it with a black SUV parked across the road. You could only try and fail and eventually be forced to put your name on a document that said you were wrong. The writer arrived on a Friday afternoon 6 weeks after the final withdrawal unannounced. Marcus buzzed back to Savannah's office. "There's a man at the front. He's not a family. He asked for you specifically." A pause. "He says his name is Kane." Savannah came out. Victor was standing in the front room in his jacket, which surprised her because he didn't usually wear it when he came to see her. He wore it for community events, for funerals, for occasions that required the full weight of what it represented. He was holding something in both hands, small, a patch of some kind she thought at first, then she looked more carefully. It was an emblem, old leather, well-worn, the kind of thing that had been handled many times over many years. She recognized the shape of it. She had seen versions of it on jackets on the walls of homes she had visited, in photographs that families brought to consultations. But she had never held one. She had never been given one. She looked at him. "This belonged to Michael Dawson," Victor said. "Iron. The first one." He held it out to her. "It was in his personal effects when he died 35 years ago. His mother kept it. When she passed, it came to us. We've been holding it since." He paused. "We've been trying to figure out what to do with it for a long time. Where it belonged." He paused again. "We decided it belongs here." Savannah looked at the emblem in his hands. She thought about a 25-year-old woman standing in the back of her father's funeral home on a night 35 years ago, watching grown men cry and understanding for the first time that strength and grief could live in the same body. She thought about her father's face, certain and steady. She thought about the door he'd opened. "Victor," she said, "I can't take this." "I know you're going to say that," he said. "I came prepared." He didn't lower his hands. "This isn't a symbol of membership. Nobody is asking you to be something you are not. You have never been part of our world, and we're not asking you to be." He held her gaze. "This is a symbol of something else. It's a symbol of what you showed us 35 years ago, and what you showed us 3 months ago, and what you show every family that walks through this door." He paused. "It's a symbol of a door that was open when every other door was closed. We want it to live in the place where that door is." Marcus had gone very still near the hallway door. Savannah looked at the emblem. She looked at Victor's face, the dark, watchful eyes that were not unkind, the gray beard, the 64 years of a life lived entirely without apology for who he was. She thought about what it cost to carry that. She thought about what it cost to carry anything. She reached out and took it. It was heavier than it looked. Not physically. Physically, it was a small thing worn smooth with age. But the weight it carried was different. The weight of 35 years and every family that had come through this door and every moment of trust extended and honored and returned. She held it in both hands and she felt the weight of it, and she did not try to make herself feel less than she felt because she had spent 30 years creating space for other people to feel fully and completely what they were feeling, and just this once she allowed herself the same for everyone. "Thank you," she said. It was still inadequate. It was still everything she had. "You were family before anyone knew your name," Victor said. "You still are." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something she had never said to anyone outside of her own blood, something that had been true for years and had never had the occasion to be spoken. "So are you," she said. "All of you. You always were." Victor Kane, who had spent 64 years navigating a world that had strong opinions about who he was and had never once let those opinions determine who he chose to be, stood in the front room of Cole and Son's funeral home and received that sentence like the thing it was. Simple, true, irrevocable. He nodded once, the kind of nod that doesn't need a word behind it because the word is already in the room. Then he straightened his jacket. He looked at Marcus, who got his own nod shorter, but no less real. He looked at the room, the photographs, the careful, ordinary dignity of a place built on a principle, and he walked out. Savannah held the emblem. She stood in the quiet for a moment. Then she walked to her office. She set it on the desk. She looked at it beside her father's photograph, the two things side by side on the surface of a desk that had held 30 years of work and intention and love expressed through labor. She thought he would have known exactly where to put it. She opened the top drawer of the desk and took out a small brass hook she had never used. She found a hammer in the supply closet. She came back and she looked at the wall beside her father's photograph. The exact right place, she knew it without measuring, and she put the hook in the wall and she hung the emblem on it. She stepped back and looked at both of them. Her father's face, Michael Dawson's emblem, the two things that had made everything else possible. Laura Sims called that evening at 6:15. "He called," she said, and Savannah knew immediately who she meant. "Thomas Greer. He called me directly." "What did he say?" Savannah said. "He said," Laura's voice caught. She steadied it. "He said he read my personnel file. He said I was exceptional. He said I should never have been put in a position where leaving was the only principled option." A breath. "He said the company failed me. Not a formal apology, not legal language. Just a man on the phone telling me the truth about what happened." Her voice went quieter. "I didn't know how much I needed to hear that. I didn't know I was still waiting for someone inside that building to say it out loud." "I'm glad he called," Savannah said. "Did you tell him to?" I suggested it," Savannah said. Laura made a sound that was part laugh and part something that wasn't. "Savannah, can I ask you something?" "Of course." When did you know that the box, the evidence that it was enough, that it would actually work?" Savannah thought about it. She was always honest with Laura, had been from the first conversation, because Laura had built her courage on truth and deserved to receive it the same way. "The morning Richard Hale stood on my road and told me to stop the service," she said. When he said that out loud in front of 40 witnesses during a permitted funeral on a public road, I knew then. Because that was the action of a company that had gotten so comfortable in its own power that it had stopped calculating risk. And a company that has stopped calculating risk will make that mistake in front of the wrong person eventually. She paused. "I was the wrong person." "You were the exactly right person," Laura said. "Same thing," Savannah said. Laura laughed, a real one, full and sudden and surprised by itself. "Same thing," she repeated. Okay, the word again. The word that meant I am choosing to go forward. I have a job interview next week. Healthcare compliance. The irony is not lost on me. You'd be very good at it, Savannah said. I think I would, Laura said. And there was something in her voice that had not been there in the first conversation 11 months ago. A steadiness, a self-possession, the sound of a person who has been through something that tried to diminish them and has come out knowing their own size more accurately than before. Thank you for using what I gave you, she said. Thank you for using it the right way. Thank you for giving it, Savannah said. You took the biggest risk in this whole thing. You did it before there was any evidence it would matter. That's the hardest kind of courage. After she hung up, the building was quiet. Marcus had gone home. The consultations were done for the day. The front door was locked. The lights in the service rooms were off. Savannah sat at her desk for a long time. The kind of sitting that is not rest and not work, but something in between. The processing of a chapter, closing the feeling of a weight redistributed into something manageable, something that could be carried forward rather than simply endured. She thought about all of it, the whole shape of it from the beginning. Her father opening the door 35 years ago, the weight of an emblem on a hook on the wall of her office, 8 families building again, Laura Sims with a job interview, Thomas Greer and an independent auditor, and 30 to 40 cases in a regional portfolio that were going to be examined by someone who had been told in plain English that what had been done was wrong. She thought about Daniel Dawson going into the ground with his people around him, with the sound of engines and the cold October air, and Francis standing straight because he believed she was the strongest person he knew. She thought about her father's face. She picked up her tea. She opened the daily log she had kept every working day for 30 years, the simple record of the day's work. The family served the small notes that added up to a life, and she wrote the date, and she wrote what had happened, and she wrote at the end of the entry, in her careful, ordinary handwriting, all claims withdrawn, every one. The work continues. She closed the log. She put the pen down. She looked at the wall, her father's photograph. Michael Dawson's emblem, the 2 anchors of the room of the work of the life she had built on a principle she had not chosen so much as inherited and then chosen again every day for 30 years. She stood up. She straightened her collar. She turned off the desk lamp. In the morning, she would unlock the door. She would make the coffee. She would prepare for another day of helping families say goodbye to people they love, because that was the work. And the work did not stop, and she did not want it to. The grief was always the same, and the love was always the same, and the door was always going to be open for the person who arrived at it, not knowing where else to go. That had been true when her father built this place. It was true when he handed it to her. It was true on the morning a man in a charcoal suit had stood on her road and told her to stop, and it was true now, and it would be true every morning after this one for as long as she drew breath and put the key in the lock and stepped through the door she had inherited and made her own. This was what she was. This was what she had always been. Not famous, not loud, not powerful in the way that the world usually recognized power with titles and capital and corporate resources, in the confidence of someone who had never once been told they didn't belong. She was the woman who opened the door. She was the woman who remembered the names. She was the woman who had spent 30 years learning that the quietest people carry the longest memories, the deepest loyalties, and when the moment finally demands it, the strongest hearts of anyone in the room. They had tried to stop her funeral. They had tried to take her, building her inheritance, her father's principle made physical in wooden walls, and 30 years of trust accumulated, name by name and family by family. They had calculated that she was ordinary and therefore beatable. They had believed that alone meant powerless. Every single one of those calculations was wrong, because Savannah Cole was never alone. She had been building her people for 30 years, one door opened at a time, one name remembered at a time, one grieving family received without judgment at a time. She had been building something that had no name in any legal document and could not be seized by any lien and could not be stopped by any black SUV parked across any road. She had been building the kind of trust that shows up without being called, the kind that arrives 40 bikes at a time and stands silent on the road because silence in that moment says everything words cannot. And in the end, in the only end that matters, that trust was the most powerful thing in Red Valley, Tennessee. It was the most powerful thing Savannah Cole had ever held. And she had held it every day for 30 years quietly without announcement, in the service of people the world often overlooked. That was her legacy. That was her father's legacy. That was the principle that had survived everything Heritage Capital Group had thrown at it and come through intact, confirmed, and more clearly itself than it had ever been. Savannah Cole turned off the light. She locked the door behind her. And in the morning, as she had always done, as she would always do,